Well, good evening. Thank you all for joining us as we're going to be talking about Thompson-Finch Farm, the agricultural ground lease there, how the land came to be protected, and our search for the next farmers. There's going to be a lot to get through this evening, so I thought I could give a quick overview, and then we'll see if we can get through this material and leave as much time as possible for all of your questions and some of our answers. So, quick introduction. My name is Terrence Duval. I work with the Columbia Land Conservancy. I'm the Director of Land Protection and Stewardship. I'm joined by Sam and Cameron, my colleagues at CLC, and the three of us have been working with Don and Marnie over at Thompson-Finch Farm as we're considering kind of this kind of next generation of the ground lease. And so if you are interested in this opportunity and you reach out to CLC, you're going to probably reach one of the three of us and speak to all three of us and Don and Marnie as well. We're also joined by Art Collings of the Dutchess Land Conservancy, who holds the conservation easement on the property. And for the time being, I would just direct all of your questions to the chat box. If you can drop any questions that come up, we're going to open up questions once we get towards the end of the program. And Cameron and Sam will be keeping an eye on that to make sure if you do pop a question in there, we can get to it before the end. Let's see, following this as well, we're going to be sending out a more detailed request for proposals with a lot of the details that I'm going to explain written out, as well as additional information. That's going to be available both in English and Spanish. We're going to send it to all of the attendees here this evening. We're going to have it available on our website and seek to distribute that as well. Similarly, we're recording this presentation. That's so that we can post it on our website after the fact. If anyone is interested in these questions, they can tune into that. And we're looking to have that recording also translated into Spanish. So if you or anyone you know is more comfortable speaking in Spanish and is interested in learning more about a ground lease, we encourage you to share this with them. So a quick run through of the agenda that we hope to get through this evening is first I'll talk about kind of the history of Thompson-Finch Farm as it came to be protected, as it came to be a forever farm, as we consider it through this 99-year ground lease. And then I'll introduce Art from Dutchess Land Conservancy to talk a little bit about what it means to be farming land that's under conservation easement. And then we can look more into agricultural ground leases generally, kind of what they are, how they operate, and specifically how the ground lease works at Thompson-Finch Farm, as well as the transition that we're seeking with the next generation of farmers. And if we can get through all of that pretty succinctly, then I'm going to ask Don and Marnie to introduce themselves and to discuss a bit of their experience at the farm, why the land is important to them, and kind of what they're hoping for as part of this transition and a successful outcome. So I know I see several familiar names on the call this evening and some that I don't, but for those who aren't familiar with this area, the Columbia Land Conservancy is based in the Hudson Valley on the east side of the Hudson River. Pretty much our service area is Columbia County. We partner with Dutchess Land Conservancy down to the south of us. And Thompson-Finch Farm is located in Ancram, New York. That's the southeast corner near Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Dutchess County. The land that the Columbia Land Conservancy owns is about 197 acres in size. It's a mix of tillable fields, stream frontage along the Roliff-Jansen Kill, and a good mix of woodland that provides both agricultural opportunities and habitat and a lot of environmental benefits. On top of the land, there is a 2-bedroom house, a barn, a machine shed, greenhouse. There's also 2 recreational structures and irrigation equipment. And all of this is kind of a 2-pronged approach to transferring the land from the current leasees, Don and Marnie, to the next generation of farmers. You can see on this map, the outline in red is the property. A lot of the tillable acreage is on either side of Wiltsey Bridge Road, which is the road that bisects the property. And to the north, you can see the Roliff-Jansen Kill. that bisects the property in that direction. So Don and Marnie had been leasing this land for about 40 years before generational transfer was going to jeopardize their security there. Having been long-term farmers taking care of that land for decades, they realized that if they had to move their operations, it wasn't a great time to restart their business. So thinking of how they could kind of keep their land tenure in place, as well as protecting the land in the future and ensuring that it could be available and affordable for farmers, led them to speak with the Columbia Land Conservancy and Equity Trust. Back before this was actually before the land was either up for sale or at imminent risk. So we had already started working with Don and Marnie to consider options. And then when that transfer came about, we worked with Equity Trust, Scenic Hudson, Dutchess Land Conservancy, and the community to fundraise and purchase that property. And so CLC organized a community fundraiser. Don and Marnie made a big push with the community. It involved a lot of communication about the importance of farming, the importance of this farm to the community, and more than 300 community members contributed financially to it, as well as institutions and those partner organizations that I've just mentioned. In the end, we were able to purchase the property, and Don and Marnie were able to retain ownership of all of the buildings on top of the property, as well as a 10-acre subdivided but still protected adjacent property where their homestead is. So with that, we were able to simultaneously take ownership of the property, protect it with a permanent conservation easement, and then lease it back to Don and Marnie with a 99-year ground lease. If you look at this map here, it's the same map you just saw. And if it's not too convoluted to follow, there are several use areas that you can see now. The bright green lines show areas that are considered resource protection areas, so those areas that need a little more protection. Then the fields are all open for agriculture. And along Wiltsey Bridge Road, there are a couple of building sites. And those building sites vary from being available for farm labor housing or residential housing or commercial activities. The idea with this kind of a conservation easement is that it directs the heavy infrastructure and development into kind of pre-designated zones so that we don't interrupt the agricultural soils and the productive areas any more than we have to going into the future. And as I mentioned, Art Collings works with the Dutchess Land Conservancy. I'm going to invite Art now to just give us a quick run through of what it's like to farm land under easement and DLC's work.
Okay, thank you, Terrence. I'm Art Collings, the Vice President for Dutchess Land Conservancy. The Dutchess Land Conservancy was founded in 1985, and we hold about 46,000 acres under conservation easement throughout Dutchess County and some lands in southern Columbia County also. Much of the land that we have under conservation easement is either owned by farmers and farmed or owned by non-farming landowners who farm the properties. We were very excited to participate in the project on Thompson-Finch Farm. It was a highly innovative project, and it was especially interesting as a way to help find ways to transition lands from one generation of farmers to the next. What a conservation easement is a almost always perpetual agreement between a landowner and a conservation organization, in this case, Dutchess Land Conservancy, that permits the use of the property and the continuing ongoing private ownership of the property, while also putting in place some restrictions that are developed to ensure the conservation of the important natural resources and farmland values of the property. And in the case of the farm, those use areas that Terrence just showed on the prior map are one of the really important ways that the conservation values of this particular property are conserved by in each of those three or four different use areas. The rights and restrictions are different, so that in the farmstead complex, the most intensive uses are permitted almost completely as of right, with very little type of consent or permissions needed. And those areas are up on the north side of the road are shown in red. And in those areas, it's possible to, as Terrence said, have a primary residence, a principal residence, and other farm structures. Then in the farm area, which is I think shown in a lighter green in general, but in those areas, those are the areas of the property that are intended for farming use. And there is the idea in a conservation easement is that there's flexibility built in to allow for appropriate farming use of a property. And I guess the owner of this particular conservation easement is an interesting one, because Columbia Land Conservancy is the landowner, and much of the conversation about what is permitted on the property would happen between Dutchess Land Conservancy and Columbia Land Conservancy over time. And the primary point of contact for most individuals who take over the use of this property will be in most cases directly with Columbia Land Conservancy as owners of the property, and with the occasional need to consult with Dutchess Land Conservancy. And kind of typical with easement properties is that we would come by once a year and walk around with Columbia Land Conservancy staff and whomever is farming, just to hear what's happening and document the conditions of the property. That pretty much covers the conservation easement and Dutchess Land Conservancy, I'd say.
Great, thank you, Art. And so I guess unless you've all been around agricultural ground leases, I think it's a good idea just to look generally at what that might mean. So I thought we could look at the basic definition, what this ownership structure looks like for Don and Marnie, and some of the more detailed points of the current agreement that we have with them. So an agricultural ground lease is an arrangement based on a community land trust model in which a farmer owns the structures and improvements on a property while the land is owned by a land trust. And a long-term 99-year lease is established with the farmer that provides affordable access to the land with the assurance that they can continue to farm the land as long as they wish. And then when the farmer is ready to retire or decides that they're going to move to a different property, they can end their lease. They can sell the structures and the improvements that they own themselves to the next farmer at those structures' appraised value. The reason we look at ground leases as kind of a successful model for keeping farmland in farmers' hands is because it affords that secure access to prime farmland. Meanwhile, the farmers can start to invest in capital improvements in structures such as their own homes or farm labor housing, knowing that they can see some return on that investment, or at least get that equity out when they're ready to retire. without having to cover really an unaffordable mortgage. And in our area of the country and our area of the state, farmland is too expensive for farmers to afford solely on a farm income. And so that's where the land trust comes in and can remove the need for a mortgage payment, and the farmers can focus on what they do in terms of farming, generating products that then get sold, and using that revenue to further their business. In this situation too, we can help the current farmers identify the next farmers and play some kind of a support role to go from the current farmers to the next farmers. And that's part of what we're doing tonight with the search, but it gets a little further, as we'll get into in a moment here. So Don and Marnie currently have, we signed a 99-year lease with them in 2019. Some of the requirements of that lease include that the land continue to be farmed organically, that Don and Marnie pay a rent. And the reason my bullet point here says fair rent, it's because the Columbia Land Conservancy, as a 501c3 organization, cannot just give land away. We can't make land available under market price. It would be considered a private benefit to whichever farmer is receiving that. So we do have to calculate what would be considered a fair rent. And with Don and Marnie, we went through a very elongated process of figuring out how you can value rents in our area, also considering the taxable amount of land there, and in-kind services that that Don and Marnie provide. Because from the Columbia Land Conservancy point of view, it's not just a farm, but it's kind of a more comprehensive view at this kind of land protection model. So in addition to a private for-profit enterprise happening on that property, we also look to include some form of education to the public access to the Rowliff Jansen Kill that I described. And Don and Marnie provide in-kind services by monitoring that public access, by monitoring a hunting program on the property. And all of that is something that we've taken into consideration along with kind of the administrative fees. So all of the staff time that does or doesn't go into managing this property gets calculated out. And every 5 years, we revisit this with the farmers to come up with an annual rent. Under the current structure, Don and Marnie directly pay the county and school tax for the property. And in addition to that, they pay an administrative fee once a year to the Columbia Land Conservancy. I believe right now that's about $1,700 or so for the administrative fee, and about $6,500 for the property tax. And then, what we will do as part of this transition is go through that same process with the incoming farmers. But that gives you a sense of what the recurring costs of renting this land would be. My off-kilter bullet point there also says the land can be subleased. So currently, Don and Marnie do farm a portion of the property, but they're not always farming the full tillable acreage. And so they've entered into subleases with neighboring farmers, and they've ended up through their, as they can describe, through their process, figuring out a way of rotating crops with subleases to fit well with their business model. And that's something that can continue. So the next farmer who comes onto the property isn't required to farm all of the land themselves, but they will be in charge of managing any of those subleases, and all of those subleases will have to adhere to the same ground lease terms that we have signed with that farmer. Let's see, so this farm transition, kind of as a quick background to that, Don and Marnie reached out to us when they were ready to consider kind of who might come next. And we decided that we will take a collaborative approach in terms of spreading the word and kind of seeing what interest that generates, and then helping kind of collect all of the interested farmers and getting that information back to Don and Marnie. So what we're asking for currently is we're asking for anybody who's interested to send us an email with a short letter of interest so that we know that they are interested, and then we can help make sure that they can then get us a resume or a summary vision or draft business plan. And Sam, Cameron, and I are more than happy to help get all those pieces in place. We're going to review those materials with Don and Marnie, ourselves, and independent review committee made up of community members. In the past, when we've had these review committees, they've involved or they've included members of the county agricultural farmland protection committee. They've included local town board members and CLC board members, and it allows us to use a rubric and just kind of break apart each application for its strengths in particular, so that we're trying to remove as much bias as possible. Following that, we'll kind of pass all of that information on to Don and Marnie to review and to consider, and then make those relationships or communication channels open with the farmers. The goal currently is that over the next several months, we'll hear from farmers who are interested. We'll be able to review their materials, and Don and Marnie will be able to enter into those conversations in kind of the early part and summer of 2024 next year. And I guess the goal would be that they could enter into a purchase contract by the fall of 2024 or the end of that calendar year. That being said, I think it's important to consider that in a ground lease transition like this, Don and Marnie live next door. They're really hoping to have a relationship with the farmers who come on and be able to impart some of the wisdom that they've acquired over decades of farming in that area. So there is going to be the need for kind of forming a relationship before just jumping into a purchase contract. And I don't think any ground lease transition from one to the other will look identical. So we're kind of in our first turnaround of transferring this ground lease, and we're excited to see where it goes, but it's definitely not going to be a cookie cutter operation. Once Don and Marnie and the next farmer have been able to kind of emotionally and mentally commit to that kind of a sale, they will let Columbia Land Conservancy know that they're interested in that transfer. And at that point, CLC will order an appraisal of the buildings and the infrastructure. And through that appraisal, we'll be able to come up with a maximum resale price. This is how the ground lease keeps the land and the property affordable, while also allowing the current farmers to get the equity that they have in those structures out. So once the appraisal comes back, if it's agreed upon by everybody, the incoming farmers would finance or otherwise purchase the property from Don and Marnie. And CLC would work with that incoming farmer to revise the current ground lease that we have with Don and Marnie to accommodate their operation, their needs, and their expectations. Even though it's a 99-year lease, like I said, with the rent, where we recalculate the rent every 5 years, another strength to the ground lease model is that if at any point in those 99 years, both the Columbia Land Conservancy and the farmers find something that could be tweaked for the better in that lease, we're at liberty to revise that lease. So that's something that kind of allows us to move forward, knowing that as information changes, as situations change, we can be responsive to those. And now I would like to invite Don and Marnie to say a little bit about their experience at Thompson-Finch Farm, kind of their hopes for this transition, and anything else they may want to share.
We're unmuted. Okay. Well, one of the things that we had hoped to convey, and I unfortunately didn't get some photographs out for this, but um, we uh, we have been farming for about 40 years, and one of the unique things that is going on right now is that we we are on another portion of the property that is protected by the conservation easement and has a agricultural zone, etc. And that's a separate, like I think it's 11 acres, um, and the other farmhouse. Um, but what will happen when the transition takes place is we'll just stay over on our new land, but the farmer will take over the other house on the property, which is the house that we lived in for 35 years. I mean, we were that was we never thought that we'd be in the other farmhouse, and the reason that that happened is because um, the old farmhouse, all the organizations involved took a look at that and said, we have to cut that off because it's going to suck up all your money and time trying to fix it. So that's how we ended up in there. Um, and I guess the other thing that I really did want to say tonight was that we understand that people might look at this as a frightening prospect, but it's much simpler than it initially looks. We do have very specific tools and techniques that we've developed over the years, and they work. And we've been able to grow, 4 acres of strawberries with a crew that's much smaller than most vegetable growers have. Um, but there are very specific things that we take very, very seriously, and it works. And we have been able to do it consistently, um, pretty much. Now, another factor is that I have had some very serious health issues this year, and that caused us um, to 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 reduce the scope of what we were doing. So right now we don't have 4 acres. We have a much smaller area, but we're looking forward to a new farmer taking it on and and getting back into the full scope of it. But again, to say that um, it's not nearly as scary as it looks, and we are looking forward to teaching a new farmer the tools and techniques that we've developed to make it work, and that coupled with the being able to lease land out to neighbors and so forth, it the whole thing actually flows, and it's doable. Don't be afraid of it. Okay, what else?
No, I just wanted to thank Columbia Land Conservancy, Equity Trust, Scenic Hudson, and Duchess Land Conservancy for making this possible. They're great to work with.
Well, I can say the feeling is mutual. I don't think a project like this can happen without a lot of people coming together. And I was more in the wings when this first came about, but I was aware of the weekly calls you all had for, I think, over a year to make
Yeah.
sure that that your long-term goals were kind of baked into the conservation easement as well as the ground lease, and that you were looking to create this opportunity going forward. And I think that speaks a lot to the operation you've put together. So if anyone's not familiar with Thompson-Finch Farm as kind of a U-pick destination, it's one of the few certified organic strawberries in our region, and it attracts people from all over the region and beyond every spring to come for strawberries, followed by blueberries. And I think if you ever picked fruit there, you've been able to see Don and Marnie's hard work pay off with their delicious food. Initially,
well, a couple of things. One is that the certified organic aspect of things is also something that we when we were formulating the ground lease, we wanted it to remain organic, but we also realized that putting the Land Conservancy, for instance, in the role of being a third party certifier or something was just not going to work. So we said, okay, we'll stick with what we've been doing, which is we've been certified organic with NOFA New York for, I don't know, 35 years or something. And so we know how to handle that, and that's also not a big deal. And that's why it has to be. That's why we're saying certified organic with a third party. Okay. I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Don. From the Columbia Land Conservancy point of view, it would be probably too much for us to manage that. It's not really our area of expertise, but we see the importance, particularly with your farm and the way it's been managed for so long and the habitat that's there. In the lease itself, there's that expectation that it be certified. The nice thing about the lease as well is if something were to happen to interrupt that certification, it's not a dire situation. It's the type of thing that the farmer and CLC can meet about, and we can get on board with figuring out the best way to move forward and get it recertified. If there were, say, like a lapse in certification. So that's the nice thing about the flexibility of this lease, is that when situations arise, there's somebody on the Columbia Land Conservancy side who's really focused on just making sure that the end goals are met. And so that's kind of the role that we will continue to play. I think it's worth noting as well that Don and Marnie would love to see strawberries continue here, both because it's good land for strawberries and it's the business they've put together, but also because it's something that the community has come to really appreciate over time. And if you saw the initial announcement we made last April, at that time it said that strawberries were a requirement for an incoming farmer. Currently, that is not a requirement. We are still hopeful that we find somebody who's interested in continuing that. But we also recognize that for people who are not themselves strawberry farmers initially or already, that might be a lot to bite off. That being said, you have Don and Marnie, who would be great mentors for figuring out how to replicate or build off of their model and incorporate it into whatever farming you're currently doing. So that's something to consider as, I think, a bonus to this opportunity. In addition to that, there are several requirements that the Columbia Land Conservancy kind of maintains as part of this lease. And the terms currently that I'm about to kind of spell out are the current model lease that we have. It's what we expect going forward. But before any lease is signed, it's something that we would be reviewing in detail with the incoming farmer. And so the purpose of the lease is to make sure that the land stays productive and stays feeding people, clothing people, that it's creating useful products from the land and supporting an active business. And for that reason, we do require a minimum revenue, annual revenue or gross revenue from agriculture that's being produced on that property. And that currently is a $90,000 a year gross. However, that is also tiered. So over the first several years, you can work your way up to that threshold. And then every year we would ask you to enter in your revenue, so we can keep track of that to make sure that the purpose of the lease is being met. There's also the expectation that at least 50% of the active agricultural land is being used any single growing season. And then anything more than 50% can be maintained as open land as long as it's mowed once a year, so that the fields themselves don't grow in. And as we were saying before, up to 30% of the land can be subleased to another operation. That's at the discretion of the lessee. More than 30% can be subleased, but at that point you would have to notify CLC, so that we kind of know kind of that current layout, and you would have to just request our approval to sublease more than 30% of the overall acreage. On the map that I showed before, you might have noticed that there is a good amount of woodland near the stream, but also in the southern portion of the property. And that wood typically is available for on-farm use, such as firewood, fence posts. If you're interested in commercial timber from that woodland, that's a possibility as well. It would have to be in accordance with a conservation easement. It would require approval from Columbia Land Conservancy and a forestry plan that we can review and approve. And then up to twice a year, we may inspect the property, and that would come with a 24-hour notice, but it would allow us to go throughout the property, just not into the buildings. I think, let's see what other details might be of interest. In terms of the current infrastructure, it's been a while since it has been appraised. I believe the last appraisal we have for those structures I mentioned above, which were the 2-bedroom house, the barn, the greenhouse, machine shed, recreational structures, it was appraised at $87,000 in 2016. So you can kind of use that as your starting point, but recognize that over the last 7 years, a lot has happened with the real estate market, in addition to kind of your conventional appreciation. So we expect that the appraisal that comes back will be greater than, we are sure that it'll be greater than $87,000. We're not sure how much more, but that should hopefully give you a ballpark idea of what financing that purchase might look like. Let's see. I guess actually, Don and Marnie, could you describe a little bit about public access and what it looks like currently? And maybe just kind of how much attention or time that the in-kind services require?
Mm-hmm. Well, we were working with what's the woman's name that would be handling that? We were working with her last year from CLC about about the access point.
It might have been Whitney.
Whitney, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so we were working with Whitney, and we all came to an agreement that trying to get people to the Rojan, but then tell them that they couldn't go in the water wasn't working. And so CLC abandoned that idea. And what we did, the CLC provided a couple of picnic tables, and we created a beautiful little site adjacent to where people were parking for Pick Your Own, where people could go, and signage out there, so that became our current public access effort. And we do manage the hunting and fishing aspect of things as well. So right now, yeah, that's the picnic table site idea replaced the stream access, and it doesn't take. I mean, we've spent a little time every year, but it's not very. It doesn't take a lot to do that. Um, I also I wanted to mention that in 2022 we had a phenomenal strawberry pick your own, the best ever, best ever. And then this past year, 2023, we had the worst ever. We had basically almost a complete crop failure. So that's aside from the fact that we also then, because of health issues, decided to shrink the amount of acreage that we were planting this past year. But we have the mirror of the greatest year and the worst year all right packed together.
And we can talk about that on Sunday when you come.
Yeah, when people are here.
That's a great reminder. Actually, thank you. I should have mentioned earlier that if you weren't aware, this upcoming Sunday on October 22nd, Don and Marnie will be inviting people to the farm between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Sam, Cameron, and I plan to be there as well. And we're going to be able to walk around, see the fields for yourselves, and also ask more questions.
And another aspect of the farm that'll be up for discussion and is we have a small apple orchard, and we've been frozen out now 2 years in a row, basically over a like a 10-year period or 15-year period. It's a labor of love that's lost money. It never really works. So we'll be talking to the incoming farmer about that if they really want the apples. Otherwise, we'll suggest that they get rid of them. So that'll be a something to see and talk about when people are here. Okay.
Great, thank you. And I would just say, if anybody has questions now, you can drop them into the chat, or if you want to raise your Zoom hand, so we can call on you. Don and Marnie, while we're waiting to see if any questions pop up, do you want to give a little more background about your time on the farm?
Well, we I guess to say again, we have these specific tools and techniques that we've developed, and they work. And another aspect of the growing season that is super important is we have an irrigation system and thousands of feet of pipe, and one of the things that we use it, the primary reasons that we have it, is for frost protection. And our farm is a frosty place. We're in a big, like a big bowl with the roll of Jansen running through it. And we know that if they say that there's any chance that that might freeze, it's going to. So we keep an eye on that very very carefully. And so we're out there in the springtime with the frost irrigation system, probably, a really bad spring is like maybe 8 nights, and sometimes it's only 2 or 3, but we take it very seriously and make sure that we're out there and doing it, and paying attention to that. And we've never had a we've been able to protect the strawberry blossoms, um, even in the bad freeze that we had this year. So it works. I see there are questions coming in. Should we?
Yeah, I see a question from Bonnie here, asking if from the website information, and will you be able to listen to this meeting? I can answer that. Both, you'll get an email following this. If you've registered and you're here, you'll get an email that gets you back to our website, and also you'll get a link to the recording, so you can listen to it at your leisure. See, and then I see Ben Crockett is asking, wondering if a more detailed map of the farm will be made available. Curious to learn about the percent difference of different land types on the farm, protected land, ag land, etc. Yes, the map I showed before, Ben, we will be including with the materials that you get, and that breaks out kind of the active farm fields, the woodland, and the different use areas. And so that's something that hopefully has enough detail for you. And if not,
I can speak a little bit about the soils and the terrain.
Sure. Yes, please.
Yeah. So it's not flat. It's gently rolling terrain, and it's really nice soils with outcroppings, different like islands and so forth of dolomitic limestone, like what we're sitting on in that picture. There are places where there's quite a bit of limestone and other places where there's not. So the fields, we pick rock out of the fields every year, and it's that, it's the limestone mainly that comes up. So yeah, it's some very good soils, but with the stones, and mostly well drained and above the floodplain, quite nicely. It doesn't flood. There's one field at the bottom by the Rojan that gets wet sometimes, but generally it's all good. But it's not flat. In fact, we contour plant all of our raised beds for the strawberries. We lay them out with a level. That's because if you think of 4 acres of raised beds is also 4 acres of rain gutters, basically. And so we learned that it had to be really level, and so that makes also no bed is the same length as another. They're not just like a bunch of straight lines. But it's a good soil, and not steep but not flat.
That's great. And one thing that we can also make available is a soil map with kind of a breakout of what the soil types are. So when folks are looking for that information, it'll be available to them as well. Ben, I see another question from you asking if hunting on the farm could be replaced by other types of public access to fill the need. I might actually ask Don and Marnie to talk about kind of the need for deer hunting there. I think we look at it as an important land management strategy, but
yeah, we have a small group of local hunters, and for us, yeah, keeping the deer population down is very important. Another thing, we didn't get a picture of it, is we fence off our strawberry planting every year with an electric 4-strand, two sort of 3-dimensional fence, and it works, but it's another thing that has to be carefully maintained. And one of the reasons that it keeps working is also that it keeps moving. We put it up in one place and it's there for throughout that winter, and then the following spring, and then when the strawberries are gone, we pack it all up and move it to the new field. So that's another one of the things that's the fencing and the hunting are really important, because the deer can just wipe everything out. And if that electric fence failed because of lack of I can't find the word.
Electricity.
If the deer learned to, like, it got left off and that wasn't electrified, and the deer figure it out, then that's it. It never works again. The deer teach the other deer. So it's really important to maintain that as well.
Yeah, I think, from looking at it now, I'm guessing that deer hunting will stay there. In terms of what the in-kind services would look like, that is something that there's probably some flexibility with, depending on whoever's coming in, and if there's some skill set that they have that could be considered in kind, as long as overall the same services that Don and Marnie are providing are somehow covered. That's something that would kind of come through while with the incoming farmer working with CLC to update our ground lease. And it occurred to me as well, I don't think I mentioned, Don and Marnie, that while you're interested in ideally finding a farmer who would continue growing strawberries, you're not looking to sell the farm business. You're looking to sell your structures and improvements. But if there's any handoff of a strawberry growing operation, from my conversations with you, it sounds like that's something you would be doing kind of as like a one-on-one kind of relationship with the incoming farmers, not necessarily as a business transaction.
That's correct. Yeah.
We talked to some people about that concept, and it was kind of agreed that, it's like handing someone a treadmill and you say, okay, you can run as fast as you can. and then they, it's not fair to say, but we also want you to buy it. It just didn't seem to be there wasn't enough value there. The value is if you work hard and are willing to learn our techniques and stuff, then you can do great. And that's enough. We're not selling a business.
That's great. And in addition to all the other information that you all receive following this, you can see a breakdown of the kind of the acreages and the typical average revenue that Don and Marnie are producing. But I guess the bulk of the production is in about 6.5 acres, with 4.5 acres of strawberries, 1 acre of blueberries, and 1.5 acres of apples. Currently, Don and Marnie are planning to keep farming the blueberries, but that's something that, as you come to the farm and you look around, we can get into those particulars as well. Let's see, I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, maybe there was one more question. Oh, I'm seeing your question here, Deanna. What do regular site visits from CLC entail? And is there documentation or criteria you can share? Yes. So the site visits would be, coordinating with you to let you know that we are going to come walk the property, and inviting you to join us on that walk if you're available. Typically, we would be walking and potentially taking photos, but not going into the buildings. So it's mostly just making sure that the lease terms are being upheld with the fields and the property, and nothing that would be kind of out of sorts with the conservation easement is in place. As the easement holder, Duchess Land Conservancy will also be monitoring the property, which will involve, and Art can correct me, I think it's every other year that you would be visiting the property on foot.
Exactly, Terrence. Once every other year, we would ask for an invitation to visit the property on foot, and other years we will either look at remote imagery, satellite imagery, or as I have done for the last 20 years, I fly over a few hundred properties in Dutchess County in Southern Columbia. So one of those two.
And yeah, again, the primary reason for that visit is just to make sure that those long-term goals are being upheld, and that we don't get surprised by, suddenly a structure going up in the middle of the farm field that we had no idea about. In terms of the documentation or criteria that we can share, that's something that we'll be posting a template ground lease, and you can kind of see how it's currently structured in terms of how that documentation looks. It's set up to kind of, depending on the notification, whether it's new structures going in place or subleases going in place, or revenue reporting. Those are all kind of lined out in the ground lease itself in terms of when to contact us and how to contact us. And then if it's something that you need our approval for, it's also lined out to say, like, we have so many days to respond to you. And so all of that is very structured within the ground lease. And for the most part, that template ground lease that you'll be able to review will be the same as the incoming farmer signs. And then there is a website link for the farm, to visit the farm on Sunday. Maybe Sam or Cameron, if you're able to drop that into the chat, then anybody can sign up for that and get more information. Meanwhile, also, if anybody does have more questions after this webinar, we encourage you to either email us at this email address, tff@columbialand.org. You're also welcome to call us at 518-557-1764. And yeah, Sam, Cameron, and I are more than happy to get on a call with you, answer questions, give you whatever maps we can, or templates, or whatever else will help you learn more about ground leases, and particularly this ground lease opportunity. I think, not seeing any other questions, we may be able to say good night for now, and hopefully we'll see a lot of you on Sunday at Thompson-Finch Farm.
Here, did you see the question about if there'll be another open house?
Oh, no, thank you. I did not see that. Currently, this is the only open house we have scheduled, but it's possible, depending on how many people make it to this open house, or as the fall goes on, we may schedule another. If you're interested in visiting the farm, but you can't make it to the open house this Sunday, please contact us, and we can find a time either for you to visit the farm, or they'll just let us know that there's enough interest to host a second open house. All right, well, I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining us, and looking forward to hearing from a lot of you. All right. Take care, everyone.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, and thank you very much. Terrence and Don and Marnie. And
Okay.
see you
Thanks,
later.
Art. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.